I am Rabbi Jonah Lehman from Shaarei Tefillah Congregation, where Joe, may he rest in peace, was a member since Joe and Rhoda moved here to Riderwood 16 years ago. At this time, Joe's 3 children who are here will be speaking, and we start with his daughter, Jackie.
One time in the 1990s, I came home to my parents' house in New Jersey. My dad had just gotten off the phone, still kind of giggling, and wanted to tell me about it. He had a computer, and much was new to him, and he had been making good use of the 800 number and the nice folks on the other end who take you through tech issues step by step. That afternoon, my dad had called that 800 number. The kind employee on the other end said he wanted to start by asking my dad if his modem was analog or digital. My dad answered the guy, "If I knew that, I probably wouldn't have to call you in the first place." My parents have been living here in Maryland at Riderwood for many years. Like many of their friends, they have been so happy here and have been living a very full, active life. It goes without saying that my siblings and I are more than delighted that they made such a good move for both of them. One thing some of their newer friends might not know is what a beautiful pair they make on the dance floor. Cousins and close friends always knew that at a wedding or other event, my parents would be on the dance floor for as much as the party as they could, and they always received many compliments. At Riderwood, dancing continued until my dad's knees no longer allowed it. However, while he was able to, my dad did as much as he could, including one year joining the line dance group. In a phone call with him one December, my dad was telling me about the potluck get-together that a line dance group had that time of year. He noted that he felt lucky that other people in the group brought platters and knew how to set things up nicely on the tables. And he was happy to tell me that he had purchased a box of muffins from Costco that looked really good on the box, and that he planned to bring that box and put it down on the table, and that thankfully someone else would arrange them nicely. Well, I visited my parents a couple days after that phone call. I was sitting near my dad when I noticed that box of muffins on a shelf. I asked, "Is this the box that you plan to bring to that potluck and plop down on the table?" And he answered enthusiastically, "Yeah, don't they look good?" And I had to tell them, "Sure, Dad, but this is a box of muffin mix." Of many traits, being able to laugh at himself was one of my dad's most enjoyable for me. He could laugh uncontrollably and in a way that his eyes looked closed, his mouth wide open, and his belly shaking. In addition to a good sense of humor, my dad was simply an easy person. If you can visualize an example of a person for whom things literally roll off their back, my dad would have many balls rolling down his, including ones that not many other people could bear. See, my dad grew up in an orphanage. My dad also grew up during the Depression. He and his friends would say, "We didn't know we were poor, everybody was." My dad has a faint memory of coming home when he was about 4 years old in Worcester, Massachusetts, and some adult telling him that his mom went away. This was 1930, and his mom had a condition and needed to be institutionalized in Boston. According to some people, she probably had multiple sclerosis. My dad's father, Benjamin, had 3 boys at home, and as would be expected at that time, he put his 3 sons in the Worcester Jewish Home for Orphans and the Elderly. This is where my dad spent his childhood, in what was a bare-bones institution with a very unkind director and no warmth or adult communication whatsoever. My father wouldn't complain about not having a mother or of growing up in this orphanage. But he would always say about his childhood that the only person he was close to in his formative years was his middle brother, Bill. My dad was the youngest, and his oldest brother, Harry, was 9 years his senior, so Harry's life at that time overlapped minimally with that of his brothers. It was Bill who protected Joe. It was Bill who showed love to Joe. It was Bill who didn't let a teacher hit Joe, taking the punishment instead. And it was news about Bill who was a pilot and a pilot trainer for the Army in Florida in 1944 that my dad received when he was 18 years old. My dad was stationed in Europe at that time, and an officer called him into his office and read him the letter that said that Bill had been killed in a training flight off the coast of Florida. It was this loss that most affected my dad out of all the things about his younger years. Often the only memory he talked about, and a loss he felt so deeply that it never subsided. After World War II, my father took advantage of the GI Bill and attended Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. He quickly found his interest in business and had a real aptitude for it. After being offered and working at jobs at a couple of companies, including G. Fox in Hartford, Connecticut, my dad decided to go back to Worcester to work with his father. His father, Benjamin, had always made a very modest living selling hats out of his suitcase, traveling to nearby areas around Worcester by car. Joe had ideas on how to grow this business, and to hear my dad's friends from the 1950s tell it, he thrived at it. The business soon had a large building, many employees, and far more buyers than Benjamin ever imagined. If friends were meeting on a Friday at a beach house at Cape Cod for the weekend, Joe might show up sometime Saturday afternoon, having gotten an idea that week, and was off and running to make it happen. For much of my life, I remember my dad being a big fan of the small guy, the mom and pop shop, the person trying to start their own business. It was one of his favorite stories to watch. He remained an admirer of a single person or a small business that makes it. But then came Costco. What a business model they had, he would marvel as he walked around that store. His mind was always working, enjoying how a business can be successful. This is how my siblings and I knew my father in our childhood. He was a businessman. He was at the office every day or on a business trip. Throughout my life, in any place where my dad saw hats for sale, he went to look at them, turning them over and checking the labels. We moved from Worcester to New Jersey when my father decided he wanted his business to concentrate on New York City, and throughout our childhoods, he left the house for a 6 a.m. train every morning. And he seemed to never get sick, and he seemed to never miss a day of work. At some point, he did stay home on Fridays and work from home. And boy, did he know New York well. He knew the spot on the train and on the platform at Penn Station where he wanted to be. He knew how to catch trains in the nick of time. He comfortably crossed New York streets mid-block, and he had a favorite bagel and coffee truck on his walk to the office. And he was happy. My dad was always happy. Troubles at work or a worrisome investment, those of us living with him would never know it. He let things roll off his back, and he didn't bring problems home with him. He also had quite a balanced lifestyle. My father was involved at our synagogue, serving on committees. He was committed to his fitness. He would go for his run before dinner. On weekends, he enjoyed knowing that he ran with friends 20 years younger than him. He would run the local turkey trots every year and many other local races, and he often placed first for his age group. He pogo sticked in our basement, jumped rope on our patio, and he played tennis regularly. With that, too, he was proud that he played with a good friend of the family more than 25 years younger than him. Danny, I won't out you in front of all these people. Perhaps even above his running, dancing, and tennis, my dad loved skiing. If we were on a family trip and upon reaching the top of the lift on a bright, sunny vacation day, we knew what my dad was going to say. With a huge smile on his face, what a great day for skiing. What a great day for skiing. And perhaps above his commitment to fitness, beyond his acumen for business, my dad was most devoted to family and those close to him. I know a cousin, a sister-in-law, and a nephew who can speak today to the support they received from Joe during the hardest parts of their lives. Years later, I heard about a few days he had taken off from work to testify as a character witness for a friend of ours in New Jersey who was in trouble. and the admiration and appreciation with which my dad's former Worcester employees speak of him brings tears to my eyes whenever I think of it. One former employee and dear friend told me many times that I could never imagine what he feels he owes my father. Another Worcester employee had tears in his eyes as he told me that if there was a picture next to the word mensch in the dictionary, it would be of my father. As fortunate, loving, and appreciative as many people feel about my father, no one has been more fortunate to be on the receiving end of his devotion than my mom, Rhoda, and my siblings, Jane, Judy, and Jimmy, and me. And later on, Dad embraced Judy's husband, Stu, in that same way. To say that he made every decision with us in mind could not explain the degree to which his purpose in life was to take care of us. He chilled at the idea of money being spent on him when it could be for us. He was the parent who took us anywhere to see our friends, who would go to the airports at any time of the day or night. He'd say he drove to JFK in Newark dozens and dozens and dozens of times just for our Israel trips alone. And regarding those flights to Israel or to anywhere else our wanderlust took us, he would always say, Jimmy, he likes the pickups a lot better than the drop-offs. My dad did a lot of the typically dad things for those days. He taught us all to ride bicycles, and he was proud that we didn't use training wheels. He would just run along the side of us and hold on to the back of the seat. In the fall, he would rake the leaves into piles so we four could jump in them. He climbed to the roof of our flat-roofed home after some rains to sweep off water, and would let us come up the ladder with him much more than Mom would ever have liked. He taught us all to drive, and to this day, Judy and I are proud of our parallel parking skills and sense of direction and credit Dad. When Judy bought a car with manual transmission, my dad made sure to teach Jimmy and I to drive stick shift. And like any good grandparent, my father knew that his grandchildren were the cutest kids ever. Maya, Yael, Benny, Tommy, Miriam, and Devara, you were adored. 6 beauties, 6 Israelis, 6 children so fortunate to have my parents as their grandparents. My dad had certain subjects of particular interest to him. Anyone close to him knew his interests were business, politics, and sports. He was a voracious news follower of those subjects. If something wasn't of interest to him, he knew that too. One time on a Rhodes Scholar trip with my mom and cousin Mildred, the group sat down for a lecture. The presenter began. Today I will be discussing the 5 kinds of mushrooms of southern New Jersey. My dad stood up and walked out. If it was the Red Sox or Patriots making news, my dad had fun checking the Boston papers as well as the city papers of the teams they had defeated. Of course, he had a blast with Super Bowl 51, the greatest comeback ever, awake many nights afterwards reading stories about it and exchanging emails with other New England friends. If you spent any time with my dad talking about sports, you may know his absolute favorite game ever. The 2004 Red Sox-Yankees playoffs, Game 4, bottom of the 9th inning. Those of you that follow baseball know the rest. And in my dad's opinion, the most beautiful sports play to watch, a well-executed double play in baseball. The worst job in sports, punt returner. He said to me, how would you like to know that while you are looking up at the sky, about 10 men averaging 250 pounds each are running as fast as they can at you with the sole aim to knock you down? Over these years while living in Riderwood, we have witnessed my dad lose the ability to do his favorite activities in life. The jogging, the dancing, the skiing, the tennis. And yet my dad's mood was always upbeat and his spirit unbroken. Just as when he was young, he never felt sorry for himself or had a sour disposition. His smile and good nature were a constant for everyone around him. His huge hugs greeted us every time we saw him. His generosity never waned, His gratitude, his friendliness, his warmth never diminished. He was grateful to live decades. He was grateful to be here at Riderwood. He was grateful to be near his brother Harry's family here in Maryland and to have Jimmy and me so close. He has told me that for me and Jimmy, when it comes to him, we don't know the word no. Jimmy, I believe we did it. I think we treated him and cared for him with the love he deserves. In April of this past year, my father lost a dear friend from Worcester. I think that Joe Sumner and that friend, Bobby Swidler, had a bromance long before that word was a thing. When Bobby died, my dad received condolences from friends. In response to a friend's warm words, my dad wrote back, "That was Bobby, more aware of what you did for him than what he might have done for someone." I knew and loved Bobby too, and I'm sure my dad's description is an accurate one. But what my dad didn't know was that he had written his own epitaph. Joe Sumner, more aware of what you did for him than what he might have done for someone. I love you, Pop, and more than you can ever be aware of. And I know you absolutely don't care, but I think your modem was digital.
My dad always had a lot more patience for Jackie than he had for me, so I'm going to keep my remarks brief. So I'm a school teacher, and I have a lot easier time planning, say, a math lesson than I did crafting a eulogy for my father. You know, he lived 93 years, and 50 of those years he was with me. So there's a lot of material, and I just had to boil down, you know, many, many years of memories and stories down to one little piece of paper. If you're sitting in the pews, there's a really good chance that at some point you got an email from my dad. And Jackie sort of alluded to this. There's a good chance you got an email from my dad about, say, investing with Vanguard, about Israel, or one of the Boston sports teams. My dad had a lot of interest, Ken, in chess and sports, but my dad would spend a lot of time, particularly at Riderwood, just on his computer, when it didn't break, or when he didn't break it, just Googling things, finding articles, and then sending those articles to all sorts of different people. I mean, it didn't really matter if the person on the other end was interested. My dad figured if he was interested, somebody else must be interested. So that's how my dad spent a lot of time, and again, I'm guessing a lot of you were on the receiving end of a lot of these emails. And now that my dad is gone, all you residents at Riderwood, you're going to find have a lot more. You're going to find a lot more bandwidth available to you. My dad had a lot of layers to his personality, including a lot of self-confidence. He often said that if you look confident, and if you look like you know what you're doing, then you can really go anywhere you want to, and nobody's going to stop you. And I'm going to give you an example of this. Back in the 1990s, my dad and I went to a New York Yankee game in the Bronx. They were playing the Tampa Bay team. And my dad was friends with one of the ball players, Billy Hatcher. He knew him through business. So my dad wanted to get to the game early because he wanted to meet with Billy, and I figured in my mind he's going to, see Billy. My dad's going to be standing on this side of the stands, and Billy will be on the field, and they'll shake hands and chat, and for a moment, then that will be it. That's what I had in mind. So we got to the game early. Tampa Bay is warming up, and we went to our seats, and my dad said, "Jimmy, I'll be right back." So he walked down. He walked down to the front row, and I figured that's where he was going to stop, but he decided to actually, that's not good enough for him. So he actually stepped over. I'm not making this up. I was incredulous as I was seeing this. He stepped over, and he saw Billy on the other side of the baseball field, and he walked with purpose across the baseball diamond as Tampa Bay is warming up for the game. He walked with confidence, and he's right. Nobody actually stopped him. And 15 minutes later, he came back to the seat, and then he said, "Jimmy, I saw Billy." Yes, you did, Dad. Yes, you did. He also saw Billy also almost got arrested and almost got hit by a batted ball, but that's okay. He wanted to do something. He had the confidence, and he walked with purpose, and he did indeed do it. Though he possessed this self-assuredness, and he had a great deal of self-confidence, he was also a very, very humble man. Jackie's again alluded to some of these stories, growing up in the orphanage during the Depression, then World War II, then his business. He rarely told people his story, although I think it's a very impressive story and very inspiring story. He didn't want to share. Not that he had anything to hide, but he just didn't want to boast. Again, a sign of humility. And this past summer, my dad's health started to decline. And people who knew him the best knew that was the case, but he rarely told people that his health was in decline. He didn't want people to worry about him. He wanted to focus on other people. Again, a sign of humility. And I find this dichotomy interesting. My dad was very, 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 very confident, but at the same time, he possessed this humbleness. Now for the love of my dad's life. And Jackie, you stole my line. So yes, he had a lot of love, of course, for Mom and Judy and Jackie, for me, and for Jane, who's not here, though Jane, I'm hoping, is watching from Israel, and for his 6 grandchildren, of course. The love of his life was Costco. He had a, and again, we should have talked about this beforehand. My dad had a deep and abiding faithfulness and commitment to Costco. All right? And I'm sure a lot of you are on the receiving end of emails about Costco, right? So, it didn't really matter what he wanted. It was every week perhaps, or every 2 weeks, he would go to Costco and buy more batteries, and more rolls of toilet paper, and more bananas, and more boxes of cereal, and more reading glasses. And you're probably wondering what I'm wondering, my mom and dad live in a 2-bedroom apartment, storage is limited, and at Riderwood you get a meal a day, so they didn't really need a whole lot of food. So why did you go to Costco all the time? Well, as my dad would say, great prices, great quality, Kirkland, and they had a great return policy. You don't even need a receipt. So again, that was my dad. He loved people, but he also had a love, and then Jackie pointed this out, a love for the small businessman, but he also, again, his commitment to Costco was uncanny. I like to think that my dad raised me well. I like to think so. Thanks to him, I do invest with Vanguard, and I do my taxes on TurboTax, and I do them early. And that was one of my dad's things. Committed to the state of Israel, and of course I'm a big fan of all the Boston teams, Bruins, Celtics, Patriots, and Red Sox. And of course he also raised me to be a fan of Costco. So Dad, I want to thank you for listening, for being patient with me, and I want to thank you for loving me. You'll be missed, and I love you, Dad.
I'll be very brief. I'll try to not cry too much. Dad, thank you for being the best, most kind, generous, loving father anyone could ever ask for. I've always been told that I'm the child who looks and acts most like you, and I'm so proud of that. My husband, Stu, and my 4 children, Maya, Gail, Benny, and Tommy, all wish so badly that they could be here. They all love you so much. You've been the best father-in-law and Saba. They have each written beautiful, long, heart-wrenching eulogies. It's all right here. There's a lot of pages. I will read these later to my mother and siblings and anyone else who's interested. Dad, you always counted the months, weeks, and days until you'd see us again. My family is so heartbroken they won't see you in December as we planned, waiting for us outside with your outstretched arms and the biggest smile ready to greet us with your hugs. Dad, you passed away on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, returning your pure soul at the time of the highest purity. Please forgive me for anything I might have done to hurt you. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
We thank Jackie, Jimmy, and Judy for those beautiful words. And we extend our condolences to Rhoda, to Joe's children, Jane, Judy, and Stu, Jackie, and Jim, and to his grandchildren, Maya, Yael, Benny, Tommy, Miriam, and Devorah. I've known Joe since he and Rhoda moved to Riderwood nearly 16 years ago. Joe was always involved in a synagogue his whole life, and since Shaarei Tefillah at the time was just 10 minutes away, just basically around the corner from here, and since he had family, his brother and sister-in-law and nephew who are members of Shaarei Tefillah, our synagogue was a logical choice. From the first day I met him till the last time I spoke with him, he always greeted me with a smile and a strong handshake. When I saw him on Monday, the day before Yom Kippur, he was already confined to his bed. He had been spending most of the days, he had been spending most of the days sleeping and not being very responsive. But when I came in that afternoon, he smiled and stretched out his arms and shook my hand vigorously. Apparently, he hadn't done that for anybody else. We chatted for a couple of minutes, and I said a prayer for him, and I'm honored and glad that I have Joe's smile as my last memory of him. If I had to characterize my relationship with Joe, I'd have to say that it's centered on Judaism and more specifically on Israel. Joe loved coming to shul. When he was well, he came very regularly. He enjoyed talking to people at Kiddush, and he always had a question or some remark about my sermon to talk to me about. Joe asked intelligent questions and was always interested in learning more. He always told me about his relationship with Rabbi Jerry Zelizer of Neve Shalom in Metuchen, New Jersey. He and Rhoda and the Zelizers were very good friends, and whenever I saw Rabbi Zelizer at a rabbinic conference, he would always share stories of Joe with me. And Rabbi Zelizer, who could not be here today, shared this brief note with Jimmy that I would like to share. And Rabbi Zelizer says this: wherever Joe Sumner moved, he was an Ohev Rabbanim, a lover of rabbis. He valued the position of the rabbi in community as the key player. Joe joined the synagogue immediately, that was in 1971 in Metuchen, and attended, whether that was an Orthodox synagogue in Worcester, the synagogue in Metuchen, or at Shaarei Tefillah, or the conservative synagogue in Jerusalem, Israel. As a rabbi, Rabbi Zelizer says, I knew that Joe understood the public role of the rabbi, and that if I needed a sympathetic ear, he was near. He regularly sat at my left hand at the Seder, and he was too kind to tell me that he had heard my explanations for some part of the Seder many times before. I valued having him as a confidant and friend, and we could discuss anything: politics, sports, investments, or Judaism. I will miss my good buddy. But even more than Joe's love of shul was his love for Israel. In fact, it was a connection to Israel that brought Rhoda and Joe together. Rhoda had a friend that had traveled to Israel with Joe on a young Zionist summer trip either in 1961 or 1962. That friend introduced Rhoda and Joe when Rhoda was planning on going on that same trip in the summer of 1963. They met, that is, Rhoda and Joe met, found out that they had the exact same birthday, and then Rhoda left for her trip. When she returned, Joe had arranged with Rhoda's father that he would pick her up from the airport instead of Rhoda's father, and that sealed the deal. They continued dating for a couple more months, got engaged in February 1964, and married in June of 64. Together they raised 4 children, 2 of whom made Aliyah to Israel. Joe and Rhoda have been to Israel countless times to visit the children and grandchildren and renew each time their connection with our homeland. Often Joe would send me emails with articles about Israel, not about investing, but about Israel. Whether about a scientific discovery or about the Masorti movement, how the conservative movement is referred to there, or about some other important issue, Joe always wanted my opinion about it. He was proud that his father changed his name to Ben Sion, son of Zion, in honor of his devotion to the land of Israel, and Joe wanted to continue that tradition. After countless trips and a grandchild in the IDF, Joe couldn't be more thrilled. There is a rabbinic tradition that Judy referred to about how auspicious it is if one dies on Yom Kippur or right after. In the Talmud, they say that it is the best time to pass away. The rabbis teach us that our soul will endure in the world to come in God's presence. In order for the soul to reside there, we need to repent of our sins and be in as spiritually pure a state as possible. And if not, then surviving family members recite the mourner's Kaddish in order to help the soul achieve its place in heaven. Since Yom Kippur is a time when we are all in a state of purity, having spent all day reciting prayers of forgiveness and repentance, then it's a sure sign, say the rabbis, that one's soul would immediately enter heaven. Joe passed away at 5 p.m. on Yom Kippur, as most shuls were reciting the Mincha afternoon service, and nearing the Ne'ilah, the final service of the day. Perhaps Joe sensed that. Though he was unresponsive, people in that condition have a sense of people around them and a sense of time as well. Joe was 93 years old. He lived a long and full life. He had a loving wife of 55 years, beautiful children who loved him, and 6 grandchildren whom he adored. Joe didn't need Yom Kippur to make him a better person. He already was. He leaves behind a community that valued him and a family that learned a lot from him. We pray that his memory will always be a source of blessing and comfort. Tehi nishmatot tzura b'tzura chaim. May Joe's soul be bound in the bond of eternal life. Amen. Amen.
Or rather, because I am a religious Jew, it rivals my favorite Jewish holidays for my affection. American Jews should celebrate Thanksgiving with particular enthusiasm. First and most obvious, nowhere in Jewish history have we had as good as for so long as we have had it in America. No individuals or group have better reason to celebrate Thanksgiving in America than we Jews. Indeed, Thanksgiving is literally a Yom Tov, a good day, the best there is.